The truth is, I sold my house. My brother-in-law, Kevin, said this, and my husband and I were shocked, stunned into silence. But the person most shocked of all was my mother-in-law. Why would you do such a thing? Weren't you supposed to come pick me up? She asked, visibly upset as she confronted Kevin. Calm down, Kevin said, trying to explain his reasons. My name is Sandra. I work remotely with my husband, Robert. We had a peaceful work environment where we could take breaks whenever we wanted, and we were both satisfied with our lives. But everything changed when my mother-in-law came to live with us. Financially, we were stable, so we didn't mind taking her in. However, she disapproved of our work style. Why aren't you two going out to work? She would ask, looking at us with judgment. Her words made me feel exhausted, like history was repeating itself. We explained to her multiple times that we worked remotely. Aren't you just playing around? I've told Robert the same thing. Are you listening? When will you two start working properly? Don't you care about your future? No matter how many times we explained, my mother-in-law refused to understand our jobs. I'm so worried. Maybe I made a mistake coming here. I should have gone to Kevin's house, she would sigh dramatically. Kevin is Robert's brother. He married a wealthy woman named Carol and now lives comfortably off her wealth. My mother-in-law didn't know this because Kevin asked us not to tell her. Kevin's house isn't small like this one, my mother-in-law would say. It's huge, like a foreign castle. Well, I'm planning to move there eventually. It'll become my house someday. She often said this while waiting for Kevin to come and take her away. But we knew that day would never come because Kevin didn't want to live with her. Robert had once asked him if their mother could stay with him, but Kevin flat out refused. So, she stayed with us, even though she called us unemployed because of our remote work. We accepted that this was just the way she was. Then something happened. Out of the blue, Kevin called us. I'll be coming over this weekend, he said abruptly and hung up without waiting for a response. Robert and I were confused. What do we do? I asked. That guy hasn't changed a bit, Robert muttered. Overhearing us, my mother-in-law perked up with excitement. He's coming to pick me up. Help me pack my things, she said happily and dragged Robert to her room. Robert looked troubled. Mom, Kevin's not coming to pick you up. He probably called because something happened. But my mother-in-law didn't believe him. That can't be true, she snorted. But Kevin didn't say anything about picking you up, right? I asked my mother-in-law. He just didn't say it, she snapped back. I'm so tired of this house. You probably want me to be your housekeeper, but that's not going to happen. Her words made no sense to us. Since coming to live with us, she woke up whenever she wanted, didn't do any housework, and lived off the pocket money we gave her. Still, we didn't want to argue. If she wanted to leave, we wouldn't stop her. So, we packed her bags and waited for Kevin and his wife to arrive. The weekend arrival. Over the weekend, Kevin and his wife finally showed up. As they entered our house, they wore overly friendly, almost fake, expressions. Something felt off. Just then, my mother-in-law walked in, her eyes sparkling with excitement. You finally arrived, she exclaimed dramatically. Then, with a victim-like tone, she continued, Sandra is completely useless at house chores, so I have to do them, and Robert ignores me like I don't exist. Isn't that terrible? She pushed past Robert and greeted Kevin like a hero had come to save her. Kevin frowned at us. You guys aren't mistreating Mom, are you? Robert sighed. Of course not. We give her an allowance. She eats what she likes, and Sandra takes care of the housework. Kevin still looked suspicious. Robert, you've always been a little clueless. You might be treating Mom badly without even realizing it, and it sounds like Sandra isn't exactly considerate. That's right, Kevin, you really understand me, my mother-in-law said, beaming. Robert and I couldn't help but scowl at the ridiculous conversation, but we stayed calm and led Kevin and his wife into the living room. Tea drama. We sat around the living room table, Robert and I on one side, Kevin and his wife on the other. Suddenly, my mother-in-law snapped. Now what are you sitting around for? Serve the tea. Huh? I thought you were going to make the tea, I said, surprised. What are you saying? Making an old woman work? She turned to Kevin, playing the victim again. You see, Kevin, Sandra is like this. To make things worse, she even started fake crying. I was so shocked by her behavior that I couldn't even respond. I silently served the tea while the couple's expressions turned serious. The truth is, we sold our house. Kevin's words shocked Robert and me. But the one most stunned was my mother-in-law. "Why? Why would you do that? Didn't you come here to pick me up?" she asked, flustered, as she confronted Kevin. Calm down, Kevin said, trying to soothe her. Then he explained, "We were in debt. By selling the house, we managed to repay it, but now we're broke and have nowhere to live. So, we wanted to ask if we could stay here for a while." "What debt?" I asked. "I tried to start a business, but it didn't go well." "Oh well, these things happen, right?" Kevin said, laughing without a hint of shame. Robert and I sighed deeply, feeling both frustrated and exasperated. "Please," Kevin begged, bowing along with his wife, "we'll only stay until we find a new place. We don't have anyone else to turn to." Robert and I exchanged uneasy glances. We didn't like it, but they had nowhere to go. Reluctantly, we agreed to let them stay, but only for 1 month. "Got it," Kevin said, still smiling as he left to prepare their move. The very next day, Kevin's belongings arrived, way more than we expected. "Where should we put all this stuff?" Robert asked. "We're in trouble. Maybe we need to sell some of it or rent a storage locker," I replied as we tried to figure it out. Just then, my mother-in-law dropped a bombshell. "I've been thinking," she began, "wouldn't we be more secure in the future if Kevin stayed here? So, you freeloaders can leave, can't you?" Robert and I were speechless. "If you insist, I can tolerate Robert staying," she continued, "but I don't need a wife who can't do anything. Get a divorce, then we can use the space Sandra occupies for Kevin's stuff." Her eyes sparkled eagerly as she looked to Robert for agreement. "What are you talking about?" Robert replied, completely stunned. "Didn't I just say that if you two aren't happy with Kevin and the rest of us, you can leave? You're basically freeloaders. You're not needed in this house," my mother-in-law snapped. "You two just loaf around doing that so-called remote work while Kevin is trying to start a business. You're a nuisance," she added, acting as if it were her own house. Robert and I exchanged looks of disbelief. Kevin and Carol, who had been quiet, looked surprised at first, but then started smirking. "That's actually not a bad idea," Kevin said. "Mom, that's a great idea. Carol and I could just live here instead of looking for a new place, right, Carol?" "Yes," Carol agreed. "It's uncomfortable with you two around. It would be helpful if you sold the house to us, especially since Mom is on our side." Robert and I were stunned by their audacity. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Robert started angrily, but my mother-in-law interrupted him with a smug look. "See, both Kevin and Carol think the same thing. So what will you do, Robert? If you get a divorce, you can stay here," she said, glaring triumphantly at me. I opened my mouth to respond, but Robert spoke first. "Don't just say whatever you want. Why should Sandra have to leave?" he shouted, his face red with anger. "Don't yell like that," my mother-in-law retorted. "It's better without a burden in the house, isn't it?" Robert took a deep breath, clearly exasperated. "You don't understand anything. This is Sandra's house." At his words, my mother-in-law, Kevin, and Carol gasped in shock. Robert continued, his tone firm and serious. "Sandra bought this house for the two of us to live in. It's her house." "What are you saying?" my mother-in-law snapped. "Isn't it the husband's job to buy the house?" "There's no such rule," Robert replied sharply. "And let me remind you, Sandra is the one who pays for everything. She covers your allowance and living expenses. She chose to take on that burden because your pension is too small for you to live comfortably." Robert glared at his mother with an intense, unwavering expression, but my mother-in-law refused to believe it. She turned to me, snickering as if it were some kind of joke, still full of disbelief. "Unbelievable. Sandra just plays on the computer all day. She doesn't even do housework. And wasn't my allowance coming from my pension? Otherwise, how could Sandra afford to give me $500 a month?" my mother-in-law scoffed. She continued, puffing up her chest. "Sandra must be managing my pension, isn't she? I'm sure she's dipping into it, no matter what you've told Robert." She glared at me with confidence. I refused to back down. "That's not true. I've succeeded as a business owner." "You're lying. Divorce this lying wife already," my mother-in-law shouted at Robert. "You should live here with me, Kevin, and Carol. Besides, there's no proof Sandra's earning money." "There is proof," I said calmly, pulling out my paycheck and holding it up for everyone to see. The room fell silent. My mother-in-law, Kevin, and Carol all stared, slack-jawed. Robert stepped in. "We haven't touched a single cent of Mom's pension since she moved in. Sandra has been managing it so Mom can live independently if she ever wanted to, but instead, Mom, you've been bossing Sandra around and interfering with her work. You're the problem here. If you don't like Sandra, then you should leave. I don't believe this, my mother-in-law muttered stubbornly. Robert turned to Kevin and Carol. We didn't want you to live here in the first place. We only agreed because you begged us, so don't act like we owe you anything. Kevin and Carol were visibly nervous now, not used to Robert standing up to them. We were just kidding, Kevin said awkwardly. But hey, Sandra, you're earning a lot. Maybe you could teach us a thing or two about running a business, right, Carol? Yeah, Carol added, forcing a smile. We were worried about living with you, but you seem like a good person after all. Despite their backpedaling, my mother-in-law remained defiant. Don't act so high and mighty, she barked. You're just a bum, Robert. You should leave too. Go outside and see how harsh this world really is. Robert sighed deeply and said, well, if that's how you feel, we'll pack our things and move, but you'll be stuck with the mortgage on this house. If that's okay with you, don't come crying to us later. And, Mother, without our help, even with your pension, keeping up your lifestyle will be very difficult. My mother-in-law's face turned beet red. Get out then, she screamed. Kevin and Carol panicked. Wait, you don't have to do that, do you? If you two are here, we'll be okay. Enough, my mother-in-law snapped at Kevin. You're going to be a CEO, aren't you? I don't mind if you use my pension. Just start a company and show us how successful you can be. I'll show you all what happens when you defy me. Hearing her outburst, Robert and I realized it was pointless to argue any further. We decided it was best to leave and not get involved with her or Kevin's family anymore. Moving on. We left the house, transferring ownership to Kevin's name. Although the mortgage remained, we felt relieved to finally be free from my mother-in-law's sarcasm and interference. Some time passed, and while there was still a little lingering frustration from what had happened, we were able to resume our peaceful, normal lives once again. Just when we were settling into our peaceful new apartment and working from home, my husband received a call from his mother. She was sobbing uncontrollably. Kevin took my pension and disappeared. He hasn't come back in over a week. Carol and I are all alone in this house, and we're in trouble. Please help us. My husband, trying to calm her down, asked what had happened. I gave Kevin all of my pension to start his business, she cried, but he spent it all on gambling. When I confronted him, he disappeared. Unable to continue through her sobbing, the phone was passed to Carol. Please, Robert, we can't live like this, Carol pleaded. Ever since Kevin failed his startup and sold our house, our parents disowned us. My dad won't forgive us, and we haven't been able to contact him or Mom. We don't know what to do. At this, my husband muttered with disgust. I knew it. That's unfortunate, he said firmly, but don't involve us. We warned you when we left, didn't we? Even if you come crying to us, we can't help. Report Kevin as missing to the police. It's none of our business. With that, he hung up the phone. I was a bit taken aback, but my husband simply said, they got what they deserved. The aftermath. Over the following days, Carol and my mother-in-law called repeatedly, begging for help. Finally, when my husband answered in frustration, Carol admitted she didn't even know how to report someone as missing. Surprised, we told her to contact the police. For a while, Kevin remained missing, but then we heard the news. Kevin had been arrested for a bank robbery in another state. Apparently, he had committed the crime to repay his mounting debts. Worse still, it turned out this wasn't his first offense, and he was now facing significant jail time. Carol, now unable to return to her parents' home, was still living with my mother-in-law. Divorce from Kevin was probably the least of her concerns as she registered with a temp agency and struggled through her first-ever job, just barely making ends meet. As for my mother-in-law, Kevin had taken every last cent of her pension. Left with no choice, she had to start working part-time to repay his debts, a harsh reality she never imagined she'd face. A lesson in consequences. While my husband and I expressed some sympathy for my mother-in-law and Carol, we remained firm in our decision to cut off communication entirely. They were now facing the harsh realities of life that my mother-in-law had so often spoken about. Meanwhile, my husband and I returned to our peaceful, fulfilling days, grateful that we had set boundaries when we did.